Hello everybody, I am Jarrett Ross, the GeneaVlogger, and on today's video, I will be discussing my updated 23andMe results. While 23andMe has been in the news for the past couple of years for a lot of negative things, especially in terms of the credential stuffing attack that happened, and then the subsequent lawsuits that came with that, along with the bankruptcy and the sale of 23andMe and the various hoops that the companies had to jump through for that. And it seems like the company's starting to come out on the other side. There was a ruling by one of the judges in terms of the payouts for lawsuits related to the credential stuffing attack. So that looks like it's finishing up, which should help them finishing up with their bankruptcy. And then on top of that, it looks like Ann Wojcicki, the original CEO of 23andMe, will become the new owner of 23andMe. I don't know if that was fully confirmed, but I know that that was kind of the big thing where originally they thought it was going to be another company, but then Ann Wojcicki came in and was able to actually get it from them. But of course, it seems that they are doing other things on the back end of the website, so the company is still working towards improving itself, and this update seems to be part of that. Now, one thing I always like to do in all of my videos discussing my DNA test results, I always like to go through my family tree first to give an idea of what are we going to expect from the results. Because that's a big piece with these, is that they're not perfect. The percentages you get, they're not going to be exact, and it's only a vague idea of your ancestry. So knowing what you already are going to expect in your family tree can help you in interpreting it, as well as identifying what are things that might be indicating something you didn't realize was in your ancestry. So here we have my family tree, and this is the fan chart of my family tree, and it's broken into 4 colors. Green and blue for my paternal side, and then the yellow and orange for my maternal side. And largely my ancestry is all Ashkenazi Jewish. But there is a little bit of nuance beyond that, where I have some family lines, like this green family line, where that's coming from Romanian Ashkenazi Jewish ancestry. There's also this branch in my family where I know nothing about my great-grandmother's ancestry. So for all I know, I could have Sephardi, I could have Ashkenazi, maybe I have Italki, maybe I have Romaniote. Who knows what could be back there? Although, more than likely, it's going to be some form of Ashkenazi. For this branch of my family, this half of the blue area, they largely came from the Litvak area, which is in present-day Poland and Lithuania. A lot of ties to Warsaw and things like that, but Ashkenazi Jewish. And then this area of the family tree traces to a town known as Tulchin, which is in the Vinnytsia Oblast in present-day Ukraine. Over here is where we get the first major differences, where this family line of mine, this is 100% Sephardic Jewish. And then on this line, my great-grandmother Jane Moscow is 1/8 Sephardi. So all of her ancestry was Dutch Ashkenazi, except her grandmother Gela's mother was a Sephardic woman. So based on that, I should actually expect about 7.8% of my DNA to be Sephardic ancestry. Then for these lines, they're all Ashkenazi, largely tracing to areas of present-day Ukraine or Belarus. So for the majority of my ancestry, we're going to expect Ashkenazi Jewish readings, and if they are able to break that down into more specific regions of Ashkenazi Jewish, we're going to expect some Romanian Ashkenazi Jewish, a lot of Ukrainian Ashkenazi Jewish, some of that Litvak, Polish, Lithuanian Ashkenazi Jewish, and then Dutch Ashkenazi Jewish. And then, as I mentioned, about 7.8% Sephardic Jewish. So with that, we're going to look at a few different reports when it comes to the DNA results. We're going to look at ancestry composition first. So here we can see an overview of things, and they have this little explanation that they've released version 7. So this is version 7.0. And it has a major expansion of reference populations in Europe and the Americas. So we can explore what's new, but I'm not going to worry about that right now. We're going to worry about the actual results. And right off the bat, Ashkenazi Jewish, 93.5%, which is really close to what we would expect based on my known ancestry. So we were expecting about 7.8% Sephardic, which would then equate to 92.2% Ashkenazi Jewish. And so this is well within that range, very, very close. So that seems to be pretty strong. And one thing with DNA is that when we inherit DNA, it's not perfect. The recombination is somewhat random. And so we can get different percentages than what we would expect if recombination was perfect. So if it was perfect, we would expect that 92.2, but it's not. And then it seems that the Sephardic ancestry is then broken up into a bunch of very, very small percentages, but a lot of percentages that do make sense with the Sephardic story, but some that actually make more sense with the Ashkenazi story. So first we have Spanish and Portuguese at 2.6%, which for those who don't know what Sephardic Jewish is, those are the Jews that came from Spain and Portugal. So makes a lot of sense to get Spanish and Portuguese for that. And that's broken down into a mixture of things: Andalusian, Asturian, and Castilian, Basque, Portuguese, and Galician, Canary Islander, but all of them very small percentages adding up to 2.6. Then we get this Central and Eastern European at 0.5%, and that's coming out to Czech, Hungarian, and Slovak, so that's this area right here. And then Latvian, which is this up here. And that would tie closest with the Ashkenazi Jewish ancestry. But we are looking at very, very small percentages, which we would then call trace results. Why are they trace results? Well, because the percentages are so small that our confidence is very low in them. A lot of people hear trace results and think that means not true, but that's not true. It means low, low confidence. And so with so much sub-regional definitions that they're adding to this new version, I think that's not unexpected that we're going to see a lot of these small percentages like this, where I have an ancestry that they don't seem to define that well, which is going to be that Sephardic ancestry. So even though it seems to tie closest to the Ashkenazi Jewish, doesn't necessarily mean that is the case. It could still be representative of my Sephardic Jewish ancestry, but it doesn't necessarily mean that I had ancestors that lived in Czech, Hungarian, and Slovakia or Latvia or anything like that, although I do know that I had ancestors that were very close to those areas. Then going down, we have 0.2% Italian and Maltese, which that all being Southern Italian, and that somewhat ties to the whole Sephardic Jewish ancestry as well, especially with the Mediterranean ties between Spain and Italy. Then we get into Western Asian and North African at 3.2%, which definitely makes sense with Sephardic ancestry as well. And if you notice, they don't have a defined Sephardic reading for me. And I think that, like I said, is why we're getting all these small percentages, because there are all these ties to Sephardic Jews being in these areas. And that could mean the introduction of those local populations into the Jewish population, and then that's why there's that tie. Or it's the introduction of the Jewish population into the larger populations of those areas that causes those present-day people to have these small percentages that tie to Sephardic Jews. So this is another good spot to talk about what these actually mean when we get these percentages, because they don't mean you have 3.2% of your DNA coming from Western Asia and North Africa. It means that 3.2% of the DNA they're reading is tied to the present day population they've tested that they're defining as Western Asian and North African. So they get a bunch of people who do DNA tests, whether it's in their studies or as part of 23andMe's database, because people can opt in to be part of the studies they do. And then they use the information of people saying all their ancestry known is Western Asian or North African areas. Well, then they're going to use that and define that as part of the population. So that's all that means, is that it ties to the present day population of people testing. So that's why it could go either way, in that the Western Asian and North African populations introduce DNA into the Jewish population, and that's the tie. or the Jewish population, some of it merged and assimilated into the larger Western Asian, North African populations, and they have ties. There's also the possibility of shared ancestry between both populations causing difficulties in reading them. But looking at that breakdown further, 2.9% is Northern West Asian, which then is split almost evenly into Iranian, Caucasian, and Mesopotamian, which, it's going to be kind of up in this region, sort of. I guess this whole thing is technically all of that. And then we have 1.4 Cypriot, which is going to be right down here. And then with that, we also have 0.3% Arab, Egyptian, and Levantine, which all of that is tied to Egypt, which is right there. And so it really isn't telling me all that much difference of what the last results did. So the update's not really that helpful for me. But we can go and look at those differences. So to do that, all we need to do is go to this little information bubble, and it says we have this version history here. So we go to the version history page. And there may be other ways to get to it. Actually, I think it's at the top. But we can see version 7, the present version, and then version 6.0. And when we look at the differences, there's really not a whole lot of difference other than it starts breaking up a lot of this European. So the Western Asian, Northern African, we can see very little difference. It's just very minor changes, but still basically staying about the same. And then for our European, the Italian and Maltese, that changed a little bit. Then we have the Spanish and Portuguese changing a bit. But for the most part, it's just all of these new being added in and spreading it out a bit more. Now, there's other versions that you can look at as well if you have the premium. And personally, I haven't found anything that amazing about premium to want to pay for it, especially because they don't do it in monthly. Like if it was a per month thing, I'd do it just to try it for at least a month. But with premium, they force you to do a full year. And I was like, nothing on there seems to make me really want to do a full year. Not that it's that crazy. I think it's $125 or something like that for the first year. But I don't know. Not for me right now. But then going back to the other reports, I do also want to look at the DNA painting. And part of this is because this is where we get our confidence levels. So this is with the 7.0 readings, and the most likely is what they have. And I don't know if, I'm sure they probably say somewhere where most likely what it means. But if we look at 50%, we can see that it changes things somewhat. I'm going to kind of go back so you can see it's basically taking out some of this stuff and making it a little less defined. So you can see it takes it out. And then if we do 60%, then it actually brings that broadly Central and Eastern European in. 70%, then we see the broadly European, broadly Central and Eastern European, broadly Spanish and Portuguese. A lot of these more broadlies start popping in. We jump to 80%. Interesting, I always notice the Ashkenazi goes down, the Spanish and Portuguese goes down, but it's getting lumped into that broadly European, and that's kind of what's happening. But we're also getting these other broadly, as well as 3.8% becomes undefined. So a lot of these areas that at 80% confidence, they can't say that they define it. You get the confidence a little less and they can define it there. And I think this is a good way to also think about those trace results I was talking about, where when you have a very small percentage, the confidence changes just a bit, and then all of a sudden that percentage goes away. And so that's one of the reasons why trace results, we want to be very careful. So here at 90% confidence, we can see that it's 91.9% European, 87.1% Ashkenazi, 1.4% Spanish and Portuguese, with most of it being broadly Spanish and Portuguese, 3.4% broadly European. The Western Asian North African has gone down to 0.5% with only a tie to the Cypriot. Then we also have the trace result, which is a 0.2% of broadly Western Asian and North African. And so they have their own way of defining trace results, which I think is not robust enough, obviously, because I think a lot of this other stuff is trace. But then the biggest thing, 7.4% unassigned. And that's the big thing. It's not even that it's getting redistributed into broadly European or other. It's completely unassigned. They can't even define it continentally. So those are my new results. And if you also have updated results from 23andMe, comment down below and let us know what were the new updates and do they fit what you know of your family tree better or worse. And if you enjoyed this video and you'd like to see more of my videos about DNA testing, be sure to check out this one right here. Thank you to my Patreon patrons and YouTube members.